nothing in our consciousness, there's nothing, period, out there that says this is how you behave if you live forever. This is how you start to structure a society if I can store my personality on a computer. This is what I do if I can store that personality onto a computer and download it into another body. These are huge, far-flung, really strange questions, right? And they seem totally science fiction at this point, but everything we've seen over the past 25 years, right, is most of the science fiction canon from the 20th century has turned into science fact in the 21st century already. The idea in mind uploading is that we can store ourselves on silicon. We can upload our personalities, our brains, some part of our consciousness onto computers, and they can stay around forever.
Humans have been engineering life for thousands of years. Through selective breeding, we strengthened useful traits in plants and animals. We became very good at this, but never truly understood how it worked, until we discovered the code of life, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, a complex molecule that guides the growth, development, function, and reproduction of everything alive. Information is encoded in the structure of the molecule. 4 nucleotides are paired and make up a code that carries instructions. Change the instructions, and you change the being carrying it. As soon as DNA was discovered, people tried to tinker with it. In the 1960s, scientists bombarded plants with radiation to cause random mutations in the genetic code. The idea was to get a useful plant variation by pure chance. Sometimes it actually worked too. In the 70s, scientists inserted DNA snippets into bacteria, plants, and animals to study and modify them, for research, medicine, agriculture, and for fun. The earliest genetically modified animal was born in 1974, making mice a standard tool for research, saving millions of lives. In the 80s, we got commercial. The first patent was given for a microbe engineered to absorb oil. Today, we produce many chemicals by means of engineered life, like life-saving clotting factors, growth hormones, and insulin, all things we had to harvest from the organs of animals before that. The first food modified in the lab went on sale in 1994, the Flavor Saver tomato, a tomato given a much longer shelf life via an extra gene that suppressed the buildup of a rotting enzyme. But GM food and the controversy surrounding them deserve a video of their own. In the 1990s, there was also a brief foray into human engineering. To treat maternal infertility, babies were made that carried genetic information from 3 humans, making them the first humans ever to have 3 genetic parents. Today, there are super-muscled pigs, fast-growing salmon, featherless chickens, and see-through frogs. On the fun side, we made things glow in the dark. Fluorescent zebrafish are available for as little as $10. All of this is already very impressive, but until recently, gene editing was extremely expensive, complicated, and took a long time to do. This has now changed with a revolutionary new technology now entering the stage, CRISPR. Overnight, the costs of engineering have shrunk by 99%. Instead of a year, it takes a few weeks to conduct experiments, and basically everybody with a lab can do it. It's hard to get across how big a technical revolution CRISPR is. It literally has the potential to change humanity forever. Why did this sudden revolution happen, and how does it work? Bacteria and viruses have been fighting since the dawn of life. So-called bacteriophages or phages hunt bacteria. In the ocean, phages kill 40% of them every single day. Phages do this by inserting their own genetic code into the bacteria and taking them over to use them as factories. The bacteria try to resist, but fail most of the time because their protection tools are too weak. But sometimes bacteria survive an attack. Only if they do so can they activate their most effective antivirus system. They save a part of the virus DNA in their own genetic code in a DNA archive called CRISPR. Here, it's stored safely until it's needed. When the virus attacks again, the bacterium quickly makes an RNA copy from the DNA archive and arms a secret weapon, a protein called Cas9. The protein now scans the bacterium's insides for signs of the virus invader by comparing every bit of DNA it finds to the sample from the archive. When it finds a 100% perfect match, it's activated and cuts out the virus DNA, making it useless, protecting the bacterium against the attack. What's special is that Cas9 is very precise, almost like a DNA surgeon. revolution began when scientists figured out that the CRISPR system is programmable. You can just give it a copy of DNA you want to modify and put the system into a living cell. If the old techniques of genetic manipulation were like a map, CRISPR is like a GPS system. Aside from being precise, cheap and easy, CRISPR offers the ability to edit live cells, to switch genes on and off, and target and study particular DNA sequences. It also works for every type of cell, microorganisms, plants, animals or humans. But despite the revolution CRISPR is for science, it's still just a first-generation tool. More precise tools are already being created and used as we speak.
Article, I tweeted about this, so if you follow me on Twitter, you would have already seen it. But basically, there's this lab in the U.S. government researchers that are being funded by DARPA, who we've been talking about quite a bit lately, who are now openly talking about reprogramming your genes so that your cells, according to them, will better resist coronavirus infection. And the way they're doing this is a method called Crispr. And here in the article, you can see what Crispr, it's an abbreviation for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. But basically, it's a way of genetic modification, essentially. And they've been trying to use this for medical purposes for some time. But as we'll get into in a second here, there's a lot of questions about the safety of that based on some recent studies that have found that a lot of things can go wrong with CRISPR. But basically, if you look here, it says funding from the Biological Technologies Office of DARPA, the BTO, which I basically, my whole recent report published on thelastAmericanVagabond.com talks about all these BTO projects, including their gene modification programs that they've been researching, which include gene drive research, also known as genetic extinction technologies, how to reprogram genes so that people die.
Bill Gates is advocating for the use of genetic editing tools like CRISPR. CRISPR allows scientists to edit DNA, eliminating undesirable genes and potentially swapping in preferable alternatives. And playing God, basically. And who knows what this will do to people? You can't just take out some genes and then nothing happens. We know way too little to do stuff like that.
We'll get into in a second here. There's a lot of questions about the safety of that based on some recent studies that have found that a lot of things can go wrong with CRISPR. Research, also known as genetic extinction technologies, how to reprogram genes so that people die sooner or live forever, slow down the effects of aging, including investigations into weapons that can subvert human DNA and attack people by essentially attacking their genes. So this is the agency funding this under the guise of keeping you safe from coronavirus, right? I think it's definitely just additional confirmation of a lot of the stuff that we were talking about last time, because, maybe someone might have looked at my report and thought, well, they're developing this DNA stuff, but they just want you to produce these antibodies. But what they're saying here is that, no, it's not just that. We want to reprogram your genes so that you resist the infection. This isn't about making your own cells produce the antibodies like they've been saying in a lot of this PR stuff.
So they did that to plants, genetically modify corn, soybean and cotton plants that are resistant to the herbicide, a major ingredient in Agent Orange. Already proved in Canada in 2014. So basically, they just use that same idea, but now on humans. What could possibly go wrong with that? obviously this has now happened, what he says.
They want to genetically modify crops so they can make them immune to 2,4-D, a primary component of Agent Orange. Obviously, they want to spray these crops with some pretty nasty stuff. So the question is, what is this going to actually do to the people who are eating the food?
That we want to reprogram your genes so that you resist the infection. This isn't about making your own cells produce the antibodies like they've been saying in a lot of this PR stuff. This is about changing your genes to do things differently. This article says it, reprogram genes. I think that's really disconcerting.
That this is all under the guise of it's for your health, when it's obviously applying to, and it could, let's put it that way, it could easily be applied to just about anything that they've been working on in the past. But for those that may not know, what they're, as far as I understand it, CRISPR gene editing, this stuff is wildly untested. Is that right? And this is something, just like the vaccine they're talking about, this is the same idea. This is basically, we are the experiment. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I would say that. And actually some of the big companies that we'll get into here in a second that have been using CRISPR for medical purposes, including those funded by Bill Gates, they say that they're not really, it's an interesting topic, the fact that CRISPR can have horrible unintended consequences, and that's a separate article, we'll get there later. But here is an article about one of these quote-unquote startups that uses CRISPR for medical purposes. It's called Editas Medicine. If you look here, it was seeded by a group of investors led by Boris Nikolic. And if you read down here, it says Boris Nikolic, managing director of BNG Zero, which was created to invest in Editas. He was the former chief science and technology advisor to Bill Gates. He's also the backup executor to Jeffrey Epstein's will. Of course, as we've talked about before, Jeffrey Epstein, very interested in transhumanism and eugenics. That's coming straight up from mainstream media. He wanted to seed the human race with his DNA because he thought he was genetically superior. Okay.
That is a really interesting tie-in that I don't think people give enough attention to. I know that you've talked about it a lot. The tie, and I believe you guys are working on something right now, or the Bill Gates tie to Epstein and this whole thing. But the idea that Epstein very clearly on the record has this kind of idea, the idea, like you said, seeding the world with, changing the face of humanity with Epstein, like that's a horrifying thought. But the fact that he has ties to people like Bill Gates, that should be disconcerting for people, especially as he is now reimagining things for our world.
Bill Gates raised money for Jeffrey Epstein. Gates denied he had any friendship or business relationship with Epstein, but that was before investigative reporters from NBC News that the two met many times at Epstein's home and on his jet. One of the missions of the Gates Foundation is to raise the status of young women in third world countries. One of the missions of Jeffrey Epstein was to kidnap young women in third world countries and press them into sex slavery. Could there be any legitimate reason for Gates to be raising money for Epstein? Yeah, that's indeed very strange. The story aired last year on NBC News, and the New York Times ran one piece, but it fell into the memory hole with no follow-up. 6 months on, Gates is a darling of the media. No. Fuck no. A trusted source. Ha! Not at all. How can you trust such a guy?
Jeffrey Epstein may be dead, but this story isn't. A shocking new report from the New York Times sheds light on the connection between Microsoft founder Bill Gates and the late Jeffrey Epstein. After Gates' name came up in connection with Epstein and MIT Media Lab, Gates gave a statement to the Wall Street Journal where he insisted He did not have any business relationship or friendship with Epstein, but new reporting from the New York Times outlines numerous meetings between Gates and Epstein and a conversation with Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, a connection between their foundation and JP Morgan to set up a charitable fund that would financially benefit Epstein. You know what I want to know? Why? Joining me now, one of the New York Times reporters from this story, James B. Stewart, who is also the author of a new book I highly recommend, Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law. Let's start with this. Gates says, no relationship, nada, nothing. You report these two men met at least 6 times. What does Gates say about that?
Well, I believe that there were more, and he and his spokespeople would not say how many in total they actually met. But this included visits to the mansion, seeing each other in Seattle, flying on Epstein's plane, when we all know Bill Gates has his own $40 million plane. And then, as an investigative reporter, why would Gates say, oh, I had no relationship with him, when, of course, he knows what the facts are? So that always sets off red flags for me.
He also has one of the largest, most established foundations on his own.
Yes.
Why would they ever set up a charitable trust benefiting Jeffrey Epstein?
Well,
What's the explanation?
not only does he have the world's largest charitable foundation, but one of their primary missions is to help young women in underprivileged countries. Jeffrey Epstein was preying on young women from Eastern Europe, from South Africa, luring them into his web. And it's the antithesis of what the Gates Foundation stands for. And by the way, there were Gates Foundation employees who were horrified when they realized what Jeffrey Epstein had done and was saying, we don't want to have anything to do with this, and yet the project went on.
And what is the Gates explanation for this?
That it was all about philanthropy, that Bill Gates just wanted to find new sources of money.
But when you went and met with Jeffrey Epstein a year and a half ago, I read your piece, you knew straight out of the gate something didn't add up. It smelled foul. Bill Gates didn't notice that? One of the smartest guys in the world.
I mean, he's a registered sex offender, and after I rang the doorbell, it opens, and there is a beautiful young woman standing there who I didn't think was 16, but she could have been, 19 or something. And I thought, whoa, a sex offender has a beautiful young woman opening the door. So I didn't even have to go through the door before I realized there's something really weird going on here.
Let's go to your book, because your book is all about weird connections, dark circles, dark corners.
Yeah. So if you look here, it says this company, according to Nikolic, right, at the forefront of genome editing, the most exciting and important frontier in science. Okay, great. And if you look down there, it says that, it says also that Bill Gates was one of the BNG0 backers, one of the backers of this firm. But if you look farther down, you'll see other people that backed Editas, and one of them is Google Ventures, the venture capital arm of Google, which I think is worth pointing out. So anyway, we can move on to the next article I wanted to point out, which is not just who funded Editas, but who founded it. This guy named George Church, who is another recipient of massive amounts of money from Jeffrey Epstein. And George Church has been accused regularly of being a eugenicist. He created a dating app where he basically, the premise of it is that people that want to date can figure out if their offspring will have genetic issues or undesirable genetic traits and decide whether or not to date based on that premise. But if you look down here, it's talking about George Church and all of this. It says what George Church offers through CRISPR is planned evolution, offering humanity a bag of powerful potential gifts. And, they frame it as, the return of extinct species and ending congenital diseases. But it's worth pointing out George Church, this is how this guy thinks, said it would be a fun experiment to basically create a human Neanderthal hybrid baby and just see what would happen.
See, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malcolm, but I think things are a little bit different than you and I had feared.
Yeah, I know, they're a lot worse. Don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
It's hardly appropriate to start hurling generalizations.
If I may, I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
The first discovery was made in the spring of 1990. From a mine in South America came a piece of amber containing the fossilized remains of a prehistoric mosquito, one of many that had fed upon the blood of dinosaurs. From the DNA in that blood, science was able to recreate those giants, and for the first time, man and dinosaur shared the earth.
So that's the type of like insane mad scientist that these people are backing, and this is who's behind this company using CRISPR for medical purposes. This guy that was funded by Epstein, involved in his creepy Zorro Ranch project, and then is funded by Bill Gates and Boris Nikolic, who again have these ties to Epstein. I think it's very important that we stress these connections, because really very few people are covering the fact that Gates had all these ties to Epstein that were all, centered around their mutual interests in science. And actually Epstein and JP Morgan and Bill Gates together were in talks to create a global charitable health fund. Okay, so right. This health charity and all this stuff seems to be a vehicle for something very different.
And imagine if people like yourself and people like, anybody out there who had the courage to actually speak the truth about Epstein, imagine if they hadn't done that. This person would literally be involved with this right now. He'd be reimagining our future right next to Bill Gates as the philanthropist, right? That's pretty horrifying to think about. And they would have been just fine with allowing it to happen. Because now we know that they all knew he was doing what he was doing and didn't say anything. I want that to sink in for people. And we need to realize, too, that this is always what, let's be clear, any government, in my opinion, has done. But speaking as an American living in the United States, that our government has done over and over and over, using us as test subjects. I mean, even in regard to the different biological tests we've recently mentioned, 239 times in history, both chemical and biological. Something like Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco. I mean, that's the stated purpose. They wanted to test this on people to see how we reacted. Oh, well, it's in case there's a future attack. Except that was an attack, right? So it's the same idea. People died from that. So this is what we're always dealing with. This isn't something new. They're always using us to test something new. As the guy said, let's just make a new Neanderthal type thing and just kind of see how it goes. Well, paraphrasing whatever you just said. That's
seriously crazy. This guy is nuts. I really recommend that people look into George Church for themselves and think about why was someone like Jeffrey Epstein and why is someone like Bill Gates so into this guy, and why does this freak, honestly, still have a job?
It's more than theoretically possible to take a piece of DNA from that's so degraded in a museum piece and put it into a cell and have that cell take on new properties due to what was old information but is essentially newly synthesized DNA.
Interested? Here's Sam with some more details.
Babies. Oh, he looks just like you. But what if this wasn't your usual baby? What if it had more hair, for example, and a slightly differently shaped skull? What if, frankly, your baby was a bit of a Neanderthal?
Neanderthals are our closest extinct relatives. They diverged from us about 500,000 years ago. They lived in Europe for a great deal of time, from about 200,000 years ago to about 25,000 years ago.
Well, when one of the world's most respected genetic scientists, George Church of Harvard Medical School, apparently claimed to be looking for a woman to surrogate a clone of our long-extinct cousins, the internet went mad.
and that's because there are so many ethical issues involved that I think the ethical issues would probably stop the experiment that someone might do to produce a Neanderthal embryo.
And doesn't that scare you? I decided to check it out just in case he was wrong. He's not. This is from the National Human Genome Research Institute. All federally funded research with human participants, such as that supported by NIH, must comply with regulations that protect the rights and welfare of participants. All federally funded research. It doesn't say necessarily that privately funded research falls under the same umbrella. Knowing what I know about the pervasiveness of private foundations and what they call civil society institutes, such as George Soros's Open Society Foundation, such as the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, Ford Foundation, the one I already mentioned in here, which nobody's ever heard of, they are growing exponentially. And now we know one of the reasons that it's so handy to do this. Harvard University opened this lab about evolutionary behavioral evolution, or whatever it is, the program for evolutionary dynamics, where they experiment on DNA and RNA in the human genome and see what it does. They funded that privately. So they aren't necessarily subject to the same oversight as federally funded projects are. There are hundreds of billions of dollars floating around in medical research. The Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, they've been doing it for a long time. They've been genetically engineering mosquitoes so that they can release the mosquitoes, which have vaccines in them, to go around and bite people and give them the vaccines involuntarily. I don't know if they've ever released those mosquitoes, but I saw something today with a picture of a mosquito and it says, finally released vaccine. So I wonder how far their research has come. But that raises a question. If organizations that are privately funded are not subject to the same scrutiny with regards to human experimentation as federally funded organizations are, where do they get these human subjects?
This actually isn't a joke. Mosquito spit vaccine. Mosquito saliva carries chemicals to help stop blood from clotting and to open up tiny blood vessels. It stimulates an immune response, and the vaccine is designed to take advantage of that. Bill Gates endorses genetically modified mosquitoes. He is just involved in everything. Bill Gates endorsed the use of a powerful and controversial new gene editing tool to create malaria-resistant mosquitoes. A handful of scientists have already created mosquitoes that are either infertile or resistant to malaria parasite Crispr, a genetic cut-out-and-paste tool that allows researchers precisely edit DNA. In several cases, researchers have also employed a related technology known as gene drives.